and ask you to put who you are and where you're from in the chat box. So if you're not okay with being recorded, now is your time to log off. Hi, Michelle. A little early in Alaska. Thank you for joining us. Arizona, another early rise. Our presenters had to get up a little early for us today, too. So we're glad you're here. Well, it's 101. Why don't we get started? So welcome, everybody. Today's Special Recovery Month event, which is about uplifting cultural healing practices in tribal communities to promote recovery and wellness. My name is Steve Fry. I'm a public health analyst in SAMHSA's Office of Recovery. I'm also a person in recovery from mental health problems, trauma. I'm in long-term sobriety, and I am a family member too. I'm also a person with disabilities. I'm an older cisgender white male with a beard and glasses. Recovery Month is a national observance held every September to promote awareness of the power of recovery from mental health and substance use conditions. It celebrates the millions of Americans in recovery and recognizes the contributions and accomplishments of people in recovery, their loved ones, and allies. Recovery events are celebrated around the nation and around the world. During Recovery Month, SAMHSA's Office of Recovery also applauds the dedication of service providers, states, and communities who champion recovery with us. Recovery Month is intended to counter stigma and instill hope in the American public that recovery is possible. In celebration of Recovery Month, the Office of Recovery organized this webinar series to educate and provide key discussions in many recovery spaces. So thank you for joining us today and be part of those discussions. Each week we'll be highlighting a theme of this week, and this week is health, where one can strive to be healthy and achieve their wellness goals. The following weeks will be home, purpose, and community. And if you just Google in SAMHSA Recovery Month events, you'll be able to register for all the webinars of the week and see the other events that are happening here and around SAMHSA. Some of the major events that are happening this month are our Walk for Recovery, which is tomorrow, September 5th, right in Washington, D.C. And we're happy and pleased that we have close to 300, maybe more, local and community recovery communities joining us, family members, allies, and all of that. There's a Gallery of Hope, a virtual art show for us, and on September 24th, the Star Awards. The Star Awards are there to acknowledge great leaders in recovery. We'll also be releasing a series of fact sheets through the month as well. And thank you, Captain Finch, for putting in those resources. So we thank you for your attendance and support during Recovery Month and throughout the year. Next slide, please. This is just our standard disclosure statement that something that might be said here does not necessarily reflect the government, Health Human Services, or SAMHSA. Our next slide. So why are we here today? Today, we're here to increase our understanding of cultural healing practices to address physical and mental health and improve recovery. We're also here to identify the strengths and challenges of adopting these practices as a holistic approach to personal well-being in the context of a Western behavioral health system. You know, behavioral health services operate in an ethnocentric Western paradigm, and that alienates individuals from different minority groups. We take great strides to promote equity in SAMHSA, but we know we have a long way to go. and efforts to train clinicians in culturally competent practice helps adapt clinical expectations and respect different worldviews. So this webinar will explore and provide examples of how traditional healing practice can be activated in peer support, community environments, and improve recovery from mental health and substance use to promote social well-being. Next slide, please. So I'm pleased to introduce our presenters today, Arctello St. Amor, who goes as Tay, and Sienna Hunter Shijui. Arctello St. Amor is a neurodivergent, queer and gender non-conforming person of Mexican indigenous descent and a childhood victim survivor of trauma who deeply believes in listening to youth voices and the power of the victim survivor trauma, and the power of holistic affirmation and self-agency. Arctellos, known as Tay, spent over 10 years in national for-profit industry as an upper-level manager and director and business developer, opening startups and working with established organizations to expand into new territories all over the U.S. Following this, Tay spent another 10 years active in the nonprofit field, working with organizations throughout Chicago, New York, Vermont, California, and Chicago. He is now the executive director of Youth Move International, but you will receive his full biographies of both our presenters when we distribute these slides. Sienna is an enrolled member of the Shinnecock Nation, raised on the reservation located in eastern Long Island, New York. Sienna served as a former tribal council member and who chaired the governance and election committee that brought the trustee elections back to their territory. In 2017, she joined the team SAMHSA Tribunal Training and Tribal Training and Technical Assistance Center, by way of Wapila Consulting, a woman-owned small business, as the technical assistant TA coordinator. I also want to acknowledge and thank Office of Recovery team members who are helping me today. This is Carol Cecil, Captain Wanda Finch, and Julie Erickson. Next slide, please. So before our speakers get started, permit me a moment of personal reflection on behalf of my wife and her father. My wife's father, Ted Gould, lost his parents at age 9, and he was sent to the Carlisle Industrial School, also known as the Carlisle School for Indian Boys. As you can see here, it was opened in 1879 under the leadership of a Civil War veteran, Colonel Richard Henry Pratt, and his motto was, "Kill the Indian, save the man." The purpose of these schools was to erase the cultural heritage, as demonstrated in the photos, and teach skills to assimilate him into American industry. At age 18, Ted was given $25 and a bus ticket to the nearest military enlistment station. He served honorably in the U.S. Navy for 40 years, rising to chief engineer on a submarine, Stingray, that saw battle in World War II and the Korean War conflict. My mother-in-law and my wife had a lot of stories to share about that, but he rarely spoke of his experiences at the boarding school. The legacy of Indian boarding schools is one of harrowing trauma, pain, family separation, and cultural assaults. This shameful history should never be forgotten. So I hope you will keep him in mind as you learn about the endurance of a rich cultural heritage that we try to erase, and the importance of uplifting and sustaining these for the benefit of the tribal members and for our nation as a whole. So thank you for that. And Tay, you have the floor. Next slide.
Oh my gosh, awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen. Oh my gosh, if I have to look at a picture of myself as I do this, this is getting pretty meta. Hello everyone. As Stephen has already mentioned, my name is Ark Telos Saint Amor. It's a very long name, so most folks call me Tay, but it is all affirming. My mandatory pronouns are they, them, their, and I'm the executive director of Youth Move National. And even though we are a national remote organization, I personally, if you can see behind me, am located on the occupied and unceded land of the people of the Three Fires, which under settler colonialism is known as Saugatuck, Michigan. If I throw up my Michigan hand, I'm right here on Lake Michigan, and I'm about 2 hours around the bay from Chicago. A brief image descriptor: I'm wearing a pink knit hat. I have a set of headphones on. I have facial hair, but my nails are did. I have some visible tattoos and a sleeveless jean jacket because I pretend to be cool. And so that's a brief image descriptor. While we're doing sort of descriptors and disclaimers, I always love that SAMHSA disclaimer. I always love it so much. Before I even launch into who I am and my journey and the ways in which I practice my traditions and ancestries, I want to give my own disclaimer. Even though like I am Mexican indigenous, I am Coatecan. My tribal nation is Tap Piam, which is down in San Antonio, Texas. But I'm not here to talk on behalf of all Coatecan people, on all Native Indigenous people. I'm not even here to talk on behalf of my own sort of tribal nation and family and ancestors. I'm really here to use I statements and just to talk about myself, right? I feel like oftentimes we view things like this as like a monolith or as like, oh, well, if this happened to like Sienna and Tay, well, like it must be everybody. And that's really not our experience, and it kind of comes down to pan-indigenous culture a little bit. So folks don't know pan-indigenous culture was a way to sort of get political leverage, probably about started maybe like 50 decades ago, and to really have tribal nations come together so they have more power in numbers and united and really sort of spread a much more indigenous focused political agenda. And it served us very well in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways it also doesn't serve us because we're literally all different, right? We're different from tribe to tribe, from nation to nation, geographic location to geographic location, person to person. So that is my own little disclaimer before I jump in, just to say you're just going to be learning about me today, and I hope that that's okay. So with that, a little bit about me, right? So as Stephen said, I'm queer, I'm trans, specifically I'm two-spirit. So that is an indigenous term for folks who it's defined all differently based upon your tribal nation and yourself as an individual. The way I view my own two-spirit identity is essentially holding multiple genders at the same time. So just beyond that gender binary of only male or only female, and also having a wide plethora of both feminine and masculine traits and non-binary traits and a whole bunch of other traits. So that's sort of how I identify my own two-spirit definition for myself. I am a person who comes from immense childhood trauma. So I was separated at birth from my Native Indigenous family. I spent a little bit of time on and off again in the child welfare foster care system, was eventually adopted and placed with a white cisgender man. And I didn't get a whole lot of my culture earlier on. It was something that I've kind of had to fight for to find all my life and to find my people. And I'm a bunch of other things, but let me get to the point. What we're here to talk about today, right, is sort of recovery. And I usually, when I talk about myself in recovery, I usually put it in quotation marks. Like, I don't know if that's a term that feels honoring to me or what my journey has been. But I do know that I struggle immensely with alcohol, and I really try to avoid it at all costs. But to get into a little bit of my indigenous practices, specifically around recovery, like I practice what I like to call being in right relations. And so when I have a particular urge for a particular substance, and this may seem a little odd, but I picture it as a literal person in my mind, right? We hear all about like the inner child, right? I actually picture those urges as a literal person in my mind. And when that sort of urge comes to me, when that person comes to me, I don't try to demonize it. I don't try to like get rid of it. I don't try to ignore it. What I do is I try to be in right relations with it, right? And so I talk to it. I say like, "Oh gosh, it seems like you are here because you want me to take a drink of alcohol," and that is something that has served me immensely in the past as a coping mechanism. Was it unhealthy? Certainly. Did it lead to more harm? Absolutely. But, my relationships to substance, that's not the core root problem or issue that I have. Mine is childhood trauma. And so, in a lot of ways, substances saved me. It was a harm reduction measure that really saved me from doing far worse things in the moment. And again, I recognize today that a lot of those ways were very unhealthy, but that's not the core of my issue, right? Like it wasn't the drinking that really sort of sparked the harm. It was a harm reduction measure to get away from all of the trauma that I've experienced. I'm a victim survivor. I've survived pretty extreme, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse throughout my years as a child. Spent a lot of years houseless, a lot of years in poverty. And that was just like a way in which I was able to get through the day to day. And so currently, being in a much more privileged and stable position, when that urge comes to me, I just talk to it. And I'm like, why are you here? Like, what's going on? What do you need? You know what I mean? Because you've served me well in the past when I needed it, but I don't know if you serve me today where I'm at on my current journey. I have found other ways to cope. I have found other ways that lead to maybe more healthier and happier outcomes than going down this path. And so, my recovery journey is just really trying to be in right relations with urges that I get. And in particular, I'm very careful around that alcohol urge that comes to me. And almost universally so far for the past 7 years, I've chosen not to indulge in that. But I don't use that term sobriety or abstinence. It doesn't feel necessarily honoring to me because I don't view it as an inherent problem that I have or that I'm inherently broken or that there's a part of me that has to go away forever and be locked in a chest. To me, it's just something that I want to recognize. Why are you here? Because I think you're speaking to something broader, something different. And I need to examine that and give you some credit for where you sort of helped me out when I needed you. And so to that, I do have a relation and urges with other things that come into my mind, specifically around my, Native Indigenous culture. Like I do identify as a harm reductionist. I am a person who does use drugs. I mean, to me, cannabis, peyote, tobacco, other substances are very important to me and my culture and my ancestry. And I've really been able to be in right relations with those things. In a lot of ways, it's helped me. In the other areas that those urges come to me and they don't serve me well anymore. So I do sort of like want to uplift that there's a lot of different ways to approach recovery, to approach your healing journey, your wellness journey. And I think as long as it feels good and honoring to you, as long as like you can say like, you know what, I'm living my best self, my holistic self, I'm doing things that are happy and healthy for me and I'm not creating harm to others. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do this, and so that's sort of been my approach. Um, but I think if we're getting right down to indigenous practices, I think something that has worked me well is brother Andrew Eckerd. I don't know if folks know Andrew Eckerd, but he sort of came up with the Sacred Seven or talks about the Sacred Seven. And I've sort of adopted that for my own practices. So I have a mindfulness activity that I do when I need some harm reduction to come in place. Like that urge comes up, and then I'm not able to meet it with a whole lot of logic at the moment, right? It kind of starts to override my other thoughts, or I'm having an anxiety attack, like I'm someone who deals with co-occurring serious mental illness, and so I use the Sacred Seven as a mindfulness activity. And what that means to me is honoring my ancestry and my tradition towards honoring what is to my north, what is to my south, what is to my west, what is to my east, which folks who do math is 4. But I also honor what is above me, up, what is below me, down, and what is at the center. which is me. And that equals sort of 7 directions. And I focus on that and I do a meditation of like, what can I see? Describe the things I see in front of me, describe the things that are behind me. And it helps ground me in the moment. And then I start to tie that back to my ancestry as well. Like, oh, like my grandmother represents like the sun. And so like you're tying in and weaving in your ancestry, your heritage. And so I really, really love that. And it's something that I practice. I'm also an animist. I don't know if folks know that, but I practice indigenous animism. And it's pretty complicated, as I would imagine most religions are. But to me, the short version means that like everything has a soul, everything has a purpose, and everything has is alive. So like I look at a rock or a dead leaf, and to me, it's alive, it has a purpose, it has a soul. I look at skyscrapers, I look at cement pavement, I look at sidewalks. And to me, it's alive, it has a soul, and it has a purpose. And I think, again, it's something that helps ground me in my environment. And I'll give you a good example of this. I know I'm probably running out of time here, but I do my all my meetings outside no matter what. And I've got a little bit of a roof over me. I got a little bit of a ground over me, but year round in Michigan, I'm outside. It's the way I practice my animism and my indigenous practices. So, it looks beautiful out right now, but like come 6 months from now, that's going to be snow and ice, and I'm just going to be right out here doing that. And it's a way to ground me in my practices. It's a way to be reminded of my religion, and it helps me on those recovery journeys. And the other day, so I'm out here, and one of the great things about remote work is, like I can be looking pretty good from the top up, but I am wearing shorts right now. I'm barefoot, in which I always am. And I felt something rather large on my bare leg. And I could tell that it was crawling, and my immediate instinct was like, oh my gosh, it's a large spider. I gotta smash it. I gotta fling it off. I've gotta like jump up and run around. And my animism teaches me to slow down and to honor that living creature and to face that fear and to face those urges. And instead of smashing it or running around, I just stood still. I slowly backed up. I looked down, and it was actually a pretty giant little stick bug. And so it was a really pleasant surprise. And so I have a lot of those moments where little things come to me that are sometimes fearful, right? The unknown is fearful, like spiders and bugs and things that are so small can sometimes scare us, but that means a lot of different things in my ancestry and in my heritage. And I honor all of those things, so I meet those things with kindness and love and intention. If I'm walking and I come across trash, I pick it up and put it in my pocket and I throw it away. And I even honor trash as living and alive and has a purpose. I tend to I have a trail on the land I live behind me, and I carefully pick up all the leaves and all the grass, and I set it to a sod. I just don't go mow and plow over it. So all of those things to say to kind of come full circle, and then I'll secede my time, is just to say it really helps me to stay grounded in those traditions, in those practices, because it's present and it's mindful, and it teaches me to face my urges, to face my fears, to face those sort of like, for lack of a better term, like knee-jerk reactions that a lot of times came with my recovery journey, came with my substance use around alcohol. And so all of those kind of come full circle, and it teaches me to really be present. And I have my traditions as an indigenous person and my ancestry as an indigenous person to really thank for that. So there's a bunch more. I don't know where my time is at, but I'm going to stop there because I have a sneaking suspicion I'm probably slightly over.
You're good on time, Tay. You aroused my curiosity there, saying you weren't really connected with your true cultural heritage growing up. How did you said you sort of went looking for it. Can you share a little bit about what that was like? Where did that take you?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And that journey still continues immensely today. So by happen chance, I happened to encounter my biological aunt-in-law. It was just like such an odd happenstance that happened, and it was amazing. And I discovered that we have NICWA, which is great, and pre-NICWA, there's a lot of horror stories, right? Which of course has happened with Indigenous kids being removed from their Indigenous families. And I go to places like the NICWA conferences, and we sit in healing circles, and you hear these beautiful stories about being reunited, and folks saying like, "Oh, I always knew that you were there and present, and now you're here in my life, and I love you, and you've always been with me." And I wish that was my story, but that wasn't the case. I reconnected with this person and was like, hey, I desperately want to connect with my family, my ancestors, and know my traditions. She was like, well, I can help you out a little bit, but the rest of your biological family really doesn't want to do anything to have to do with you. So that was a disappointment, but she was, a godsend to me, and so she was able to really teach me a little bit about my specific culture and traditions and things that they had done in their family, and then I was able to connect that with my sort of Coateca Nation down in San Antonio, and really connect with them and do things, and something that I really particularly love is being able to find sort of my own path. And so I, work a lot with like the Yakama Nation up in Washington. I work a lot with, the First Nations up in Canada. I work a lot with all these different tribal folks, and like, we're a family, you know what I mean? And so like, we're just able to connect and come together, and I'm able to absorb these different things because we, no matter where we're from, one of the things that pan indigenous really helps with is that like, we love each other and we're a family, and it doesn't matter what your journey's been like, what your history has been like, how long it's taken you to find us and to arrive. You're one of us, and so I've just been welcomed with open arms, and I've been able to have the privilege to take a little bit of these traditions from all over the place, but still subversing myself and my Coatecan roots, which is pretty interesting. Our people go all the way back to the Aztecs, and so there's a lot of history out there. But yeah, that's a very brief journey down that rabbit hole.
Well, thank you, Tay. That was a beautiful story and very moving. Um, we'll ask people to withhold their questions till the end. And now, Sienna Hunter Suje, you're on.
Akwe Winimanipam. I am coming from you on my homeland territories of Shinnecock. So I am here on the land that my family has been here for generations, forever, since our creation story. And so I appreciate the time and the space today. I am the eldest of three of us, and then we've got some adopted siblings, and I am the mother of two beautiful girls, and then I do this wonderful work with the SAMHSA Tribal Training and Technical Assistance Center. And then I'm also a practicing psychotherapist, and I am licensed in 3 different states. So my training and experience and all that is kind of interwoven with each other. I don't ever really separate my identities. I am me. And so Tay, I so appreciate your words and you sharing your story. And also, the vulnerability too in sharing your story. Sometimes it's really hard to like, be that open. And I just really appreciate your words too about like the pan-Indigenous identity, because that is something that really does connect all of us, and has done us such justice in being able to raise our voices up in the world. But also it has been challenging too, because we've got lots of languages, we've got lots of culture, and so as well, I'm representing myself today in the capacity of my work, but and then also some of the stories. So in all of my work that I've been doing, I feel that it is my responsibility to carry forward stories so it's not lost. And so some of the information that I'm sharing and speaking about are stories of others that I'm carrying forward that have been gifted to me. So we could go through next slide. Next slide. I have the same disclaimer that was on this contact information for our main points of contacts at the Tribal Training Center. And we could go to next slide. And so for me, like I mentioned, My like background and training and stuff is through therapy. And so I always, a strength-based perspective. I really like to look at resiliency in the work that I'm doing. And this is one of my favorite quotes that I like to talk about and just frame for everyone looking at resiliency. Because really at the end of the day, looking at our Indigenous communities, like we have such strength and resiliency in us. And I think that's really important to speak to. And thinking about Recovery Month, you know, some of the things such as alcohol was introduced to us in a way, in a harmful way, with a ill intent and purpose to, you know, take things and take advantage of us. So take our bodies, take take us, remove us from the land that was, you know, that we were connected to, remove our food, our Indigenous food. And so all those things. So I really like to speak from the point that, like, despite all of that, we're still here, we're still thriving. And so it's just really important to think about resiliency. We could go to the next slide. And so looking at resiliency, some of these things you kind of like spoke to already, you know, in the sense of like different coping strategies. And I wrote this list backwards. I'm not a linear thinker. I'm very cyclical in my thoughts. So sometimes it's hard to do these presentations because everything's kind of like straight across. But thinking about, you know, our protective factors that we have that we hold for ourselves, professionally, culturally, trying to mash it all together. But the just positive self-image and confidence, you know, that is important for us to, especially with our youth and ourselves, to just know who we are and to come into our own and being able to identify ourselves, and to stand with that. Sleep is huge for all of us. Communicating, and we have different ways that we communicate. You know, we always have jokes, you know, sometimes in our tribal communities about how, you know, you point, so you point with your lips. So I see Tay laughing. So, you know, your communication style is big on everything. But our children, and I think that's our biggest thing here, is that all of the work that we do and how we carry ourselves are for our children. And it may not be the children who are currently here with us, but it's for the children that are to come. So we talk about that seventh generation, and that everything that we do, we leave it in a better way than we received it. And we are setting everything up so then the children that are to come have a good place to be, have a healthy space to be in, have a healthy community, have a healthy environment. And so, but we can't do any of those things unless we take care of ourselves. And so I think the self-care piece is really important. And self-care, it is an individual activity, but it could be a communal activity. And so I want to be able to kind of talk about that and frame that a little bit. So we could go to the next slide. These are also some favorite quotes of mine about self-care, that it isn't selfish. I always tell, you know, clients and other communities that I'm working with that you got to put that mask on yourself first on the plane, right? Before like something happens. Otherwise, you can't help the person next to you. You can't help your auntie. You can't help your grandma. You can't help your kid. And so you put that mask on yourself first. So you do have to take care of yourself. You do have to take a moment to step back. I always reflect about my grandfather. It was around the like same era in time, Stephen, about your father-in-law or your in-law grandfather. um, and same era,
Father-in-law,
he
I'm
was
afraid to say.
father-in-law. Okay, thank you. So he was born in 1917. He passed in 2022, so he was almost 105 years old when he passed. World War II veteran, and he happened to miss his bus to the Carlisle School because his father drank the money that was his bus money to get there. So him and his brother missed it, but his cousins went. And so, you know, that Carlisle history is very much embedded in my community too. And a lot of people don't talk about it, but you see the effects of it long term. Next slide. So holistic health and well-being. I like to look at self-care as self-love, self-compassion, self-stewardship. And I'm not going to go into great detail. I'm going to let people think about like what stewardship means to them, and self-regulation. So finding that balance and those boundaries for yourself, and that mind, body, spirit, emotional connection. Like they're not separate. If you've got a headache, like obviously you're gonna feel off. If you're feeling sad, like internally sad, not just like I'm trying to, there's not even words to describe it. It's just like a feeling. So if your spirit is kind of feeling low, then like it's those things where I could hear my grandfather say, go for a walk, go out to the beach. Because my people are water people, we're shore people. And whenever I'm away from home and I come back, first thing I do, beach, my feet go into the water, no matter what time of year it is. That is my grounding. That is my reconnection to my community. That is my self-care. And that's so important. Can we go to the next slide? And so this collective self-care. So that's the connection in the community. Like accountability partners, I'm huge on this. I've got like multiple accountability partners wherever I'm at in my life, to be like, hey, check in on me. Like I've had a lot of like loss and transition in my life. So it's always important to have someone who knows that and is like sending you a message or sending you something funny. Humor in our Native and Indigenous communities, like humor is absolutely medicine. And if someone is not poking at you or teasing you, then they don't like you. So, it really is a wonderful thing. And to be able to take a step back, so then you're never really taking yourself all that serious. And it feels good to be able to laugh with others, to laugh with yourself, and to be able to find the light in things, because there's so much that is out there that could pull any one of us into a darkness and a dark space. But our humor is really what brings us and connects us. And it's funny, I think the humor is so similar across, the Moccasin Trail. And thinking about all of the TV shows and cartoons and all these things that exist now, for our younger folks to see, and then for the bigger, broader world to be like, oh my God, like these folks are kind of funny. And it's like, yeah, we are. But just the acknowledgement too. And Tay, you talked about the mindfulness, and I think mindfulness is like an incredible practice that you could see just at an international level, looking at indigenous populations and communities, that connectiveness, that communal feeling, and just being aware of like your surroundings, that you really aren't ever alone. I like to collect stones and I hold stones, and that's always so important to me. So on a recent trip, just out here on Long Island, out to Montauk Point, I found 3 heart stones, and it was just so powerful for me. And I was thinking like, all right, well, what 3 people in my life have really helped and supported and carried my heart, for me this past year, and all of the, loss that I've had. And so I have gifted those hearts to those 3 people, because the rocks found me, they spoke to me, and I was like, okay, like this is my passing of like healing and acknowledgement, generosity, and being able to like thank someone of like holding me. We could go to the next slide. So I am really literally just coming out of our annual powwow gathering this past weekend. It's 4 days of our intertribal gathering. And so we have tribal indigenous people from all walks of life and from all corners. And during our gatherings, there is dancing, there is singing, there is food, There is medicines that are burned. And these are images from my actual powwow here at Shinnecock. And it is so uplifting to be in a dance circle and a dance space with your people. There's nothing more healing than that. And it really is, that's it. That is everything. And to have that drum, and you hear the drum and the heartbeat of that drum, and you just, your feet move, and you look at the little kids who are just learning how to walk, and they're bouncing too, in beat with the drum. It's amazing that like this generational memory that is just passed down, and that connection with the drum. And you know, we had some memorials for the at our powwow, where we were honoring people who passed in the past year. And in our fire, we have in front of it several medicines. And to just my own children, you know, have the experience of walking up and being able to identify the cedar, the tobacco, the sage, and the sweetgrass, and teach me and be like, mommy, we have to pick these items up, and we put them in the fire, and we say prayer for us, for those who've, you know, gone before us, and for those who will be coming behind us. And so they are teaching me. So they're bringing those teachings back to me. And that is the most powerful thing in thinking about culture, about recovery, about, you know, not even survival, but thriving, and really thriving through our culture, and our culture being that self-care. One of the wonderful things that we have at our powwow is not only are we honoring those that we've lost, we're honoring our veterans, our warriors. We're honoring those who are on the red road and choosing life of recovery, sobriety, abstinence, whatever language that they choose to use. And that we have songs and dances that are specifically for those, because we want to uplift people. We have acknowledgements and moments that speak to the children that were lost and stolen, and then also our missing, murdered Indigenous women, men, and folks, and being able to do those things. So powwow and our culture and our dancing and our singing, you know, it uplifts all of us in such a good, powerful way. And it's just beautiful. I think we have just a beautiful, beautiful culture, and it's so I have such gratitude every day that I get to do the work that I do, that I get to visit other communities across the country, that I get to hear these stories from, you know, my aunties, and I have all this extended family now across the United States, because every time I go into a community and do work, it's healing work, and there's always a home for me to go back to, and that's the thing here too, that whoever I meet in my walk of life, I'm like, well, if you're ever out on Long Island, like, you have somewhere to come, you have a home to be at, you have family to be. So you're never by yourself. There's always someone there standing with you. So I'm gonna pause there.
You're muted, Steve.
Thank you both so much. Is that Sienna? Excellent. Well, let's give our presenters just a huge round of applause. I'll break out the clappy hands, and now is the time for questions from our audience. Please put those in the chat. I know Carol and Wanda will help bring those to my attention. Just to tee things up a little bit, for Tay, in what ways do these practices contribute to healing from generational trauma?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad that you came to me with this question. Um, in a lot of ways. So let me just say, I feel like all of the practices and traditions and ways to be resilient and self-care, like definitely contribute to processing trauma, lowering trauma, being in right relations with trauma, and getting through trauma. But I especially love this question around intergenerational trauma because, and this is an I statement here, I don't think it does. Because in order for trauma to be processed and to stop and to get through it, it has to stop. And I do not believe that intergenerational trauma for Native Indigenous people have stopped. I mean, look around you. We are still absolutely under settler colonialism. At no point have we received an apology and some land back and talked about reparations and started to move forward, right? It hasn't happened. I mean, maybe in small bursts, we see some things coming out of California with land back movements, which are beautiful, but like it hasn't happened broadly. So I think when we talk about intergenerational trauma, I think sometimes that and even to a certain extent resiliency and self-care sometimes gets sort of co-opted by systems, and it's co-opted in the sense of like, well, we don't have to change, we don't have to stop doing harm, you just as an individual need to deal with it. So as soon as you clock out, you take a bubble bath, and that's self-care, and then you should be good as long as you can clock back in the morning, right? Like, hey, we're going to still cause harm. You're under settler colonialism. We're going to erase you continuously from our history books. We're going to be rolling back laws for Two-Spirit folks in Florida and Texas. We're going to be actively still adding to your intergenerational harm, but that's okay. Y'all are resilient. So good luck to you. And I love resiliency, and I love self-care, and I love talking about that just as an individual, but we see these movements being co-opted by capitalism and by systems as this way to burden shift the attention off them and be like, well, why didn't you be more resilient? Gosh, like it sucks that we did trauma to you, but I guess like you failed at being resilient, or it exceptionalizes us, right? And so the people who are able to you know, act normal or like process through trauma are then lifted up. So what is that actually saying about the folks who can't in that moment? Right? Like while we're valuing, we're actively devaluing. And I think about that a lot. And we are not talking about stress. We are not talking about bad things. We're talking about trauma. And trauma has a very specific definition, right? Like trauma is something that isn't just like, oops, I stubbed my toe, right? It's like reoccurring harm that puts your body back into a place as if it's happening all over again, right? It's a larger thing that happens you have to process through. And I don't know if that's something that I want to become accustomed to, that I want to be resilient to. Like I just hope that stops and we can process through that. So when we talk about intergenerational trauma, I think it is important that we relate it to our Native Indigenous practices, the ways in which we do all of these things, because it does help. It helps us as a community come together. It helps me as an individual come together, and it helps spread the word, right? But in order for us to like achieve a next level, the trauma actually has to stop, and it hasn't stopped yet. So I guess I'll get off my soapbox. That's my little ramble around there.
Thank you, Tay. Thank you. That's very powerful and a good point. I'll just check any other questions. Sienna, can you talked about having the children. Why is it so important that youth be involved in all of these events? Why is it important to have young people sort of reconnecting in this way?
Absolutely. So our youth are our elders in training. And that's our story. So we're all history. And so it's passing down the knowledge, the information. And if our children are not present, if they're not sitting with us, if they are tucked away, then they don't know, and then it gets lost. And so that is why I will share my father passed away suddenly in October 2022, and my children were very much present for the entire process. our ceremonial process of how we handle the body and our loved ones. And I did not hide that from them because death is not a mystery. It's not an unknown. It's part of our process of life and living and our cycle. And there were some people who non-native who were critical on how I was allowing my younger children to be present at these things. But that knowledge is so important for us to hold on to. And at the younger age, we all know that kids learn and retain things, language, at young ages. And so we need to have them always at the table. They're one of our most sacred beings, things that we have in our communities is our children. They hold it. They hold it for us. They hold the memories. And so we have to honor that with them.
Thank you, Sienna. We have some questions from the audience. Carol, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure will. We've got 3 so far. Do you have any ideas on how agencies can bring humor as medicine into the working environment? Is the first one.
So I will share that when I was the tribal administrator in my own community, and we would have our kind of our weekly staff gatherings, we would take turns on doing like an opening. So we always open in a good like traditional spiritual way. But then we had like a joke, and so we would always integrate like someone like bring in their favorite joke. We had a couple of folks on our team who, they were natural comedians. Sometimes we talk about like, someone's earrings or whatever the case may be. So we find something to bring that in because there's so much joy in that. But we definitely specifically had on our agendas about like who's got the joke of the week or the joke of the day.
I love that. Oh my gosh, that's such a great practice. Um, I think for me, it has to come in intentionally and carefully, but it has to come in. Often I will use I statements. So oftentimes when I'm doing this work, I'm like centered around the violence and the trauma. So I'm talking about our history, talking about how to reclaim it, talking about all the things that are happening, talking about survival, right? But that's not our full story. That freezes us at a moment in time. The full story is not to end the violence, not even just to get to like tolerance. We want to thrive, right? Like we deserve joy. We have joy. We want to uplift that joy and thriving, right? So I think you have to do both. It's so important to talk about the seriousness, talk about the violence, talk about the intergenerational trauma and all the things that are happening to our community, but to talk about us still being here and that joy that exists and trying to get to that thrive. Because if you're only here, you're missing a whole lot of the story. So for me, this is a silly analogy, but if we picture your organization, your event, your presentation, whatever, as a dish, like as a meal, right? Intersectionality, I think, is incredibly important. And intersectionality is a sauce that needs to be poured on that meal, right? So at any time you take a bite, there's going to be some intersectionality there, right? But to me, humor is like salt, right? Like you kind of like, you're careful, you're intentional with it. Sometimes you can have a little bit too much, but sometimes you cannot have enough, right? And so you've got to sprinkle that in there so you're still giving that full picture of who we are as people, our communities, our practices, because there is so much joy that exists. And if you're not talking about that, you're really doing a disservice.
Thank you.
Okay, the next one we have is how can we better support cultural practices in the grant funding setting when funding is typically grounded in Western scientific evidence?
I'm going to take a go at this because a lot of the work that we do are supporting tribal communities that have federal grants, and having to be creative in those spaces. And I could think really off the top of my head that the communities are super creative in these areas. You know, a lot of the funding does not allow for food. You know, that's a big thing, and food is huge in indigenous communities. Like, if you don't have food at a gathering, no one's going to show up. So we have supported communities where they have been able to write in gardenings, community gardenings, where they're able to plant their indigenous foods, and then they harvest it, and then they're able to plan a community event where they feed their community. There's other communities we've worked with where they have bought a whole bison, and as a cultural activity, they are teaching the children how to dress the bison, and how, you know, that food is shared. And then also they have the community garden, so there they are, they're able to learn the traditional ways of dressing the animal, feeding their community, and having that gathering. So it is difficult, but I think we are also supporting communities in creating their own language and documents, thinking about a tribal action plan, where the communities are saying, no, this is what our needs are, these are our practices, and this is what we're going to do. So there is some wiggle room that is available for us to be creative, and we are very creative people. And that has been something really nice to be able to support them. And a lot of the work that we are doing, you know, evaluations and assessments, like we are working on also saying, hey, our stuff is just as credible. And that's really nice stuff that we get to do day to day at the Tribal Training Technical Assistance Center.
That's great, Sienna. Thank you. I'm reminded, I was a GPO for a little bit, the Native Connections grant. And one time the project lead goes, one of the members of our Council of Elders wants to talk to you. And I'm like, I was terrified. I was just like, I'm in trouble. And he very respectfully and calmly and quietly took me to task over the mismatch between what we were asking people to do, what we were also requiring them to do. And they still came up with these creative solutions. But there was something he told me, because they had decided, and Tay will love this, they decided to make it youth-led, and had a lot of support from the communities that had the youth like lead this grant. This like a big grown-up grant, right? What do you do? And the youth were leading the grant and doing a lot of intergenerational stuff like you described, which is very natural and good for everyone. And one of the remarks that stuck in my head forever is that every elder is a library. And one of the things they succeeded at, in part using grant fund, mostly their own advocacy, was they had a school on their land, and they were able to get their native language accepted as one of the elective languages. You know, everybody takes French or Spanish. This became an elective language towards their graduation at high school. And I thought that was just such a beautiful way to keep that going. So pardon the aside, bringing that in, but yeah, there's challenges there. Carol, do you have another question for us?
I know we only have 1
ahead.
minute left. Can I just jump in and give my 2 cents on this real fast? I love.
I was afraid you would.
Yeah. I'll make this quick. I love all of these examples, right? Like, see, like, yeah, we are creative people. Like, we are going to figure out, we're going to do it anyways. But I feel like, should we have to? Like, I feel like SAMHSA with love, I would love for you to answer this question, right? So many times we have to do the work, for lack of a better phrase, as the oppressed, to then come to, for lack of a better phrase, the oppressor, to say, please stop. This is what we need. This is what we would love to see. And we just kind of get either nothing or some. And I would love to reverse engineer that. And maybe SAMHSA could ask this question to themselves and think about their language, think about the barriers that they put up, think about the length of grant funding and applications. And maybe we don't have to then try so hard at the bottom. So something for y'all to chew on with so much love and kindness.
Okay, well, good place to leave it at that. And as SAMHSA, I will refrain to answer, but we'll hold it in reflection. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this event. I certainly did. I want to thank you, Tay. They did a great job. And Sienna, she did a great job as well. This has really been moving and powerful. And just reminded there's a whole circularity that gets overlooked sometimes in here in SAMHSA land. So appreciations, and everyone enjoy the rest of the day for yourselves.